The MH-60 Black Hawk roared low over the Arizona desert, its rotor wash tearing at the scrub below. LT Mason Briggs sat on the open edge of the cabin, scanning the rocky expanse for their designated landing zone. He'd flown into more hostile places than he could count: Afghanistan, Somalia, the Gulf. But there was something about this place that made him uneasy. It was supposed to be simple, a joint training exercise. Nothing more than a long day of stalking, evading, and engaging the Red Team in simulated combat. The kind of drill his team could do in their sleep. Still, his hand never left the grip of his rifle. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a patchwork of sand, jagged rock formations, and dried-out gullies that cut deep into the earth. The sun was brutal overhead, baking the terrain in shimmering heat. He could feel it already pressing down through the thick fabric of his combat shirt, despite the rotor wash. The smell of hot metal and jet fuel filled the cabin. Briggs turned his head toward his men. Petty Officer Cruz was sitting opposite him, grinning behind his dark Oakleys, tapping the side of his helmet to some rhythm only he could hear. There, Medic Jacob "Doc" Henderson was going through his pack one more time, making sure every bandage and tourniquet was where it needed to be. The rest of the Team 5 men total looked calm, collected, and ready. The crew chief leaned in. 2 minutes out. He shouted over the deafening rotors. Briggs gave him a thumbs up, then keyed his radio. "All right, boys. Standard infill. We set down, sweep north through Canyon 7, link up with the Red Team at Waypoint Delta. We play their game until sunset, then hitch a ride home. Easy day." Cruz smirked. "When you say easy day, sir, it usually means it's not." Briggs didn't argue. The Black Hawk flared and dropped toward a patch of flat desert between two rocky ridges. Dust exploded into the air as the landing gear touched down. The crew chief waved them out. Boots hit dirt, knees bent low, rifles ready. Within seconds, the helicopter lifted off again, climbing back into the blue until it was just a fading shadow. The sudden silence was heavy. The only sounds were the faint whine of the wind and the crunch of their boots on loose gravel. They moved out in a staggered column, following the pre-planned route toward the canyon. The heat was merciless, shimmering off the rocks. Briggs' eyes swept the ridgelines out of habit, though he knew supposedly that every enemy here was a fellow serviceman playing a role. 20 minutes in, Cruz raised a fist, signaling a halt. He crouched, fiddling with his radio. Sir? You getting anything?" Briggs tapped his headset. Nothing but static. He switched channels. Still static. "Probably just the terrain," Doc offered, though there was a tightness in his voice. Briggs' GPS unit beeped, the extraction waypoint flashing an error message: coordinates not found. That had never happened before on a controlled range. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. "Check your comms, all of you." One by one, they confirmed the same. Dead air. They pushed forward cautiously, heading toward a shallow depression that opened into the canyon floor. Shadows began to stretch from the ridge edges as the sun angled lower. Then Cruz froze, holding up his binoculars. Movement, 11 o'clock. Briggs followed his line of sight. High on the ridge, between boulders, a shape shifted, a quick flicker, gone in an instant. Before Briggs could signal, the desert erupted. A deafening tat-tat-tat of automatic gunfire shattered the stillness, the rounds snapping and cracking as they ripped through the air. Chunks of rock exploded inches from Briggs' head, showering him with dust. The team dove for cover, hugging the ground as more gunfire poured down from the ridges. "This is live," Doc shouted over the chaos, his voice edged with disbelief. Briggs didn't need to be told. He could hear the unmistakable difference. These weren't blanks. The sharp metallic sting of real bullets ricocheted off stone. The acrid smell of gunpowder burning in his nostrils. Whoever was shooting wasn't playing. He pressed his back against a boulder, adrenaline surging. "Anyone see orange vests?" he called, referring to the bright identifiers worn by the red team during exercises. "No vests." Cruz yelled back, and, "Sir, they're not even in standard kit. Looks like mix and match gear." The realization hit Briggs like a gut punch. Someone had compromised the range. This wasn't just a glitch in comms or a scheduling error. They had walked into something real, something dangerous. Above them, muzzle flashes winked like cruel little stars. They were pinned, outnumbered, and cut off from support. And unless they found a way to break free, this kill zone was about to become their grave. Briggs scanned the ridge again, mind racing through possible moves. Whoever these people were, they had the high ground, the element of surprise, and the kind of discipline that spoke of more than just casual marksmanship. This wasn't part of any training plan he'd ever seen. And it was only the beginning. The first few seconds of incoming fire had been chaos, but now the pattern was unmistakable. Whoever was shooting had boxed them in, driving them exactly where they wanted them to go. "East Ridge, high position." Cruz shouted, his voice barely, carrying over the crack and snap of rounds tearing the air. Briggs slid to the edge of his cover, peering past the boulder just enough to catch a flash of movement. The shooters weren't just firing blindly. Their bursts were measured, deliberate, designed to keep the SEALs pinned and unable to maneuver. He ducked back as a round slammed into the rock beside him, splintering stone and sending grit into his teeth. "South Ridge, too," Doc yelled from his position. "They've got both sides." Briggs glanced up. The ridges were steep, running parallel for almost 200 yards, with the dry canyon floor where they were serving as a perfect trap. It was a classic L-shaped ambush zone, something Briggs had seen in combat, but never in a controlled U.S. training environment. They had walked right into it. "Smoke out," Briggs barked. One of the men tossed a canister that hissed thick white clouds into the still desert air. The wind wasn't strong, but it was enough to drift the cover upward toward the ridge lines. It didn't stop the gunfire. Rounds kept slamming into the ground around them, each one chewing up more of their limited cover. The canyon walls echoed the noise until it felt like the whole desert was roaring at them. Briggs' mind ran through the checklist: identify shooters, suppress fire, maneuver out of the kill zone. But every time someone shifted even a foot, the volume of incoming fire doubled. "Sir, they're driving us deeper," Cruz warned. "They want us in the Narrows." Briggs knew what that meant. If they followed the canyon floor any further, the walls would close in tighter, leaving them with even less mobility. A choke point like that could be sealed with a single belt-fed gun. "No," Briggs said firmly. "We're not going forward." The problem was, going back wasn't much better. They'd have to cross at least 30 yards of open ground under 2 sets of rifles. Doc crawled closer, his face streaked with dust. "We've got about 8 mags total between us. Can't keep up this kind of exchange for long. 8 magazines. Maybe 5 minutes of sustained fire before they were down to pistols and knives." And that was assuming no one got hit. A new burst raked the boulder Briggs was behind, one round punching through the edge and spraying rock fragments into his cheek. The heat and sting made his eyes water, but he didn't move. "Stay low. Keep them guessing," Briggs ordered. "We give them nothing to aim at." But the shooters already had the advantage. Even without seeing his team, they could predict movement patterns based on muzzle flashes and sound. Briggs needed to break that rhythm. He pointed to Cruz. "You're on my left. Doc, you stay with Carter and cover the right flank. We'll feint toward the East Ridge, see if we can draw them off balance." It was a gamble. If the shooters anticipated the move, Cruz would be exposed. But sitting still was suicide. Briggs counted down with his fingers 3, 2, 1, and popped up, firing a controlled burst toward the east ridge, while Cruz shifted to a new rock pile. The tactic worked for maybe 2 seconds before a heavy burst hammered Cruz's position, forcing him to flatten against the stone. "They're quick," Cruz shouted. Too quick for an exercise team. The gunfire changed pitch shorter bursts, closer together. They were adjusting. Briggs cursed under his breath. Whoever these people were, they were adapting like a professional unit. They were reading the fight in real time, cutting off options before he could act on them. The worst part was the silence from the outside world. Normally, live fire drills on U.S. soil had layers of oversight safety officers, medics, even drones tracking every movement. But there was no thump of rotor blades, no booming voice over loudspeakers calling a ceasefire. It was just them and the shooters. Briggs risked another peek and caught sight of a muzzle flash high up on the west ridge. The shooter there was leaning into his weapon, rhythm steady. That was a disciplined marksman, someone with enough trigger control to keep every round tight on target without overheating the barrel. This wasn't some rogue hunter who had wandered onto the range. This was coordinated, planned. A crack split the air, closer than before. Briggs turned to see Henderson Doc slumped slightly, a thin red line cutting through his sleeve. I'm good. Doc shouted quickly, already pressing a bandage against the graze. "Just keep them off me." The wound wasn't serious, but it was proof of how narrow their margin was. 1 inch the wrong way, and they'd be hauling a body. "Sir," Cruz called, "we stay here much longer. They're going to work in closer." Briggs knew it. Once the shooters had softened them enough, they could send a small flanking team through the rocks and finish the job up close. He ran the mental map again, trying to find anything they could use. The east ridge had steep switchbacks, impossible under fire. The west ridge was too sheer to climb without ropes. The only break in the terrain he remembered was farther north. And that meant pushing through at least 100 yards of open ground. In daylight, that would be suicidal. But the sun was dropping fast, shadows crawling across the canyon floor. In another 15 minutes, they might have just enough darkness to make a break, if they lived that long. The gunfire paused briefly, just a few seconds, but long enough for Briggs to hear the distant, unmistakable click of a bolt being worked. The shooters were reloading. It was a narrow window, but it told Briggs something important. They weren't carrying massive loads of ammo. That meant their supply was limited. And limited ammo meant they either had a hidden resupply point or they planned to end this before it became a war of attrition. Briggs leaned toward Cruz. "When I give the word, we're going to try and push north, use the shadows. We don't stop moving until we're out of the canyon." Cruz nodded grimly. Another burst erupted, closer this time. The echoes made it hard to tell if the shooters were moving in, or if his mind was just playing tricks on him. Either way, he could feel it in his gut. The kill zone was closing, and if they didn't get out soon, it wouldn't matter how much training they had. The canyon was choking them, not just physically, but mentally. The weight of stone walls closing in, the heat pressing down, the knowledge that every exposed inch of ground could become the point where a bullet found its way home. Briggs flattened himself tighter against the rock, feeling its sun-baked warmth leach through his gear. A rifle round cracked somewhere above, striking so close that flecks of stone cut his cheek. He didn't even flinch anymore. He couldn't afford to. Cruz crawled over, keeping low. "Sir, they're not rushing us." "Yeah," Briggs muttered, scanning the ridgeline. "Means they're comfortable." Comfortable meant confident. Confident meant they had control. Briggs' eyes flicked between the east and west ridge, trying to find the weakness. That's when something caught his attention. Not the familiar sharp glint of a rifle scope directly above, but a strange flash farther north. in a position that didn't match the exercise maps. He eased his binoculars from their pouch. Carefully, slowly, he brought them up, making sure not to let sunlight betray his own position. Through the lenses, the world narrowed to a small wedge of rocky ridge. There between two sun-bleached boulders was a figure. Not red team. Not Navy. The man was in a mismatched set of tactical gear desert camo pants. Faded olive drab top, plate carrier with no identifying patches. His helmet was bare. No markings, no camera mount. Even his rifle was wrong for the exercise. It was long-barreled, bolt-action, with a large, matte scope. Briggs lowered the binoculars, his mind ticking fast. Whoever this was, he didn't belong here. But he also wasn't firing. Not yet. A burst of incoming fire yanked his attention back to the present. Stone shattered near Doc's cover, showering the medic with grit. Henderson cursed and pressed himself flatter to the ground. Briggs looked again through the binoculars, just in time to see the unknown figure shift slightly, scanning the canyon floor, not in the jerky, quick movements of a hostile trying to spot a target, but in the slow, deliberate sweep of someone calculating angles. Cruz was next to him now, watching his face. "Sir, you see something?" Briggs handed him the binoculars without a word. Cruz adjusted them, found the spot, and froze. "That's not one of ours." "Nope," Briggs confirmed. "Not one of theirs either," Cruz added. Briggs' mind jumped to possibilities. Civilian shooter? Unlikely this was a Navy-controlled range with restricted access for miles. Contractor? Maybe, but even then, they'd be badged and geared up in standard issue for safety. And then there was the worst possibility, the one Briggs didn't want to voice yet. Someone with military training, operating outside the chain of command. The figure on the ridge shifted again, leaning in slightly toward the scope. Not toward Briggs' team. Not toward the East Ridge shooters. His rifle angled higher. Briggs' breath slowed. He knew that posture. He'd been on the receiving end of it in hostile countries. "He's not aiming at us," Briggs murmured. Cruz blinked, then frowned. Then who? The answer came in a blur. The stranger adjusted his aim just a fraction and settled into a firing position. Even from this distance, Briggs could see the controlled stillness in the man's body. No wasted movement, no hesitation. A controlled exhale, the tiniest shift forward. Briggs' stomach nodded. "That guy's a sniper," he said quietly, "and he's about to take a shot." Another burst of fire from the East Ridge drowned out the words, but Briggs didn't need to repeat them. Cruz's eyes were locked on the ridge figure, watching the slow, deliberate mechanics of the man's movements. "What's his play?" Cruz asked. Briggs didn't answer immediately. If this mystery sniper was hostile, they were in trouble. If he was friendly, why wait until now? Why let them get chewed up before stepping in? His gut told him this man wasn't Red Team, wasn't part of the trap. But trust was a currency Briggs didn't hand out easily, especially not here, with live rounds flying. The sniper stayed motionless for a heartbeat longer, then ever so slightly tilted the rifle down, shifting position again. His new angle lined up with the East Ridge. Briggs didn't like coincidences. The canyon filled with another sustained burst from the attackers, rattling against stone and cutting off any further conversation. One round ricocheted so close to Briggs' ear it left it ringing, a dull roar filling his head. He shook it off, forcing himself to focus. He risked another look at the ridge sniper, expecting him to have vanished in the chaos. But he was still there, still steady, his crosshairs trained not on Briggs or his men, but on the people shooting at them. Cruz's voice was tight. "Sir, if he's going to do something, now would be the time." Briggs nodded, but didn't look away from the figure. "Yeah. Question is, Which side is he really on? The mystery sniper's finger tightened on the trigger. Briggs didn't need to see it to know. He'd fired enough rifles to recognize the telltale flex. It wasn't just a guess anymore. A round was about to be sent downrange. And in the middle of the most dangerous spot Briggs had been in since his last combat deployment, that was either the best news he'd heard all day or the worst. The truth would come with the first echo. The sun was sinking, dragging shadows across the canyon like a closing hand. Every minute of fading light was both a gift and a curse cover for their escape, but also for their attackers. Briggs flattened himself tighter against the rock. The air smelled like hot stone and gunpowder, the two blending into something that clung to the back of his throat. Cruz was crouched next to him, eyes flicking between their dwindling ammo pile and the ridges. "Sir, we've got maybe 20 minutes of sun left. After that, it's all night vision, and I don't think these guys are going to pack it in." Briggs nodded without looking at him. "They're not here to scare us." A short, vicious burst raked the ground just feet from their position, sending a stinging spray of dirt into his face. The shooters weren't wasting ammo on blind fire anymore. They were adjusting, getting tighter. On the far side, Doc was patching. A graze on his arm with quick, practiced movements, but Briggs could see the worry in his eyes. Henderson had been in hot fights before Afghanistan, Iraq, but this was different. This wasn't war. This was supposed to be a training range in the middle of Arizona. Status? Briggs called to the rest of the team. 4 mags here. Carter replied. Maybe 5 between Cruz and me. That meant less than half their original load. Even in short, disciplined bursts, that wasn't going to last long enough to see nightfall. A distant pop rang out, distinct from the chatter of the attackers' rifles. Briggs froze. That wasn't their team's fire. It was a single, sharp report from a bolt-action rifle. Cruz looked up instantly. "Ridge guy?" Briggs didn't answer, scanning the east ridge through the smoke and shadow. It was hard to tell one of the hostile positions was suddenly quiet, no muzzle flashes winking through the haze. Another pop. This time, it came with a ripple of shouts from the attacker's side. A voice barked something urgent, too faint to make out. The Ridge sniper was in the game. "Sir?" Doc called out. "Who the hell is that?" Briggs didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he used the brief lull to reposition, sliding across the canyon floor to a new patch of cover. His boots scraped against rock, every movement slow and deliberate to avoid drawing fire. He made it without a shot being taken at him, rare luck. Luck he didn't trust. The gunfire picked up again, though now it was choppier, less coordinated. It was as if the attackers were reacting to a new, unseen threat. Briggs keyed his mic instinctively, forgetting for a second the comms were dead. Static hissed back at him, a harsh reminder they were still cut off from the outside world. Cruz's voice cut through his thoughts. "Sir, if Ridge guy keeps them busy, we could use that to move." Briggs scanned the canyon. "Move where?" "We're boxed unless we go north, and that's 100 yards of open ground. Better than waiting here for them to get close enough to finish the job." He hated that Cruz was right. They couldn't stay pinned until nightfall by then. The attackers could have flanked through the rocks and ended them in close-quarters combat. A ricochet screamed past his helmet, snapping him back to the moment. The attackers were still here, still deadly, and the sniper, if he was even on their side, wasn't going to clear all of them alone. Briggs made a call. "We use the shadows and push north. No hesitation, no bunching up. Move, shoot, move again. We keep the ridge between us and them as much as possible." "On your word," Cruz said, checking his rifle. 2 minutes, Briggs replied. They waited, counting down in tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional rifle crack from the mysterious shooter on the ridge. Every so often, another hostile position would go quiet, but never for long. Someone always shifted to fill the gap. Briggs' eyes went to the ridge again. The sniper had vanished from sight, but Briggs didn't doubt he was still there. Men like that didn't just take a couple of shots and leave. The sun was now just kissing the tops of the ridges, turning the rocks a deep, angry red. Shadows pooled on the canyon floor, deep enough that the attackers would have a harder time tracking movement, at least for now. "Move!" Briggs barked. They exploded from cover, sprinting low and fast. Gravel crunched under boots, puffs of dust marking their path. Crews laid down suppressive bursts toward the east ridge, while Carter covered the west. The attackers answered with return fire, but the angle was bad for them, now low sun in their eyes, seals darting through shadow. Still, one round came close. Enough to rip through the strap of Briggs' plate carrier, snapping it against his side. He didn't slow down. Halfway to their first piece of cover, a new burst of gunfire tore into the ground ahead, forcing them down. They dove behind a jagged slab of stone, hearts pounding, chests heaving. 60 yards to go, Cruz gasped. Another rifle crack echoed from the ridge. One of the attackers shouted something, and the return fire thinned again. Briggs didn't waste the opportunity. "Move!" he yelled. They dashed again, zigzagging through what little cover the canyon floor offered. Bullets snapped past, but most were wild, hurried pressure fire from men now watching two threats instead of one. When they finally reached the northern end of the canyon, Briggs threw up a hand, signaling a halt. They dropped into the shadow of a boulder, gasping for breath. They'd bought themselves some distance, but they weren't clear yet. The attackers could still follow, and there was no telling how long the ridge sniper would keep the pressure off. Briggs checked his mendoc was good, the arm wound sealed tight. Carter was breathing hard, but unhurt. Cruz was grinning in the way only someone who just survived a killing ground could grin. But there was no time to celebrate. Briggs scanned the darkening ridge one last time. "We're not out of this yet. Move light, move fast, and keep your eyes on that ridge. Whoever's up there." He trailed off, not finishing the thought. Whoever was up there had just kept them alive. But Briggs still didn't know why. The first shot cracked like a whip. It wasn't from the kill zone. It came from somewhere higher, distant but deliberate, and the echo rolled down the ridge like thunder over stone. For a fraction of a second, the battlefield froze. Even? The insurgents seemed confused, their rifles hesitating mid-burst as if they too were trying to locate the source. "Contact from above," Ramirez shouted, twisting behind a slab of sandstone to scan the slope. Another shot rang out. This time Briggs saw it. A thin puff of dust exploded off a distant boulder right beside an insurgent crouched behind a broken truck chassis. The man toppled backward, lifeless. Whoever was firing had a precision you could measure with a ruler. But that's what made Briggs's stomach tighten. No one from their unit was positioned up there. "Any friendlies on the north ridge?" Briggs demanded into his comms, voice low but urgent. "Negative," came the terse reply from command. "Closest overwatch is 2 clicks west. You've got unknown shooters in your EO. Unknown shooters who are helping them." The insurgents weren't taking chances. They broke formation, scattering into smaller groups, trying to make themselves harder targets. It didn't matter. Each time one moved between cover, a rifle crack split the air and another body dropped. Briggs didn't know if it was one marksman or several. He didn't care. All that mattered was the window they were suddenly being handed, a chance to move. "Covering fire on my mark," Briggs barked. His voice carried the kind of command tone that could cut through fear. "We push west, get to those rocks before they zero in again." The team answered with controlled bursts, their M4s spitting fire and sound into the dust-choked air. Briggs led the sprint, boots pounding over the uneven ground, the kill zone shrinking behind them with every leap toward safety. Bullets still snapped overhead, but the rhythm of incoming fire had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was desperate, sporadic. Halfway to the ridge line, a round hit stone so close to Briggs's head that rock chips stung his cheek. He dove behind a car-sized boulder, heart hammering. Ramirez slid in next to him, breathing hard. "Sir, this guy up there, he's surgical," Ramirez panted. "Not just shooting. He's directing us." Every shot's clearing a path. Briggs's eyes narrowed. He had seen this kind of work before. Not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, but back in a classified training op in Utah. There was a sniper known for herding friendly units through enemy fire, using precision kills as signposts. But that sniper was supposed to be retired. The thought barely formed when another sharp echo rolled down the canyon. A figure ahead of them, an insurgent with an RPG, collapsed before he could shoulder the weapon. The angle was impossible, unless the shooter had moved to a position with a perfect sightline of the valley floor. Whoever this ghost on the ridge was, they weren't static. They were moving, fast. The SEALs used the chaos like a blade, cutting through the kill zone in bursts of movement. The unknown rifle kept answering at just the right moments. One crack to drop a machine gunner, another to neutralize a hidden spotter. By the time Briggs and his men reached the base of the ridge, they were breathing the gritty dust of survival instead of the copper tang of defeat. The gunfire behind them was fading, but they weren't safe. Ramirez glanced up the steep slope. "Sir, if we climb, maybe we can link with whoever's doing this." Briggs hesitated. A SEAL manual said you didn't chase shadows in the field. But this shadow had just saved their lives, and possibly the mission. Another shot split the air, but this one was different. It didn't hit an enemy. It struck the ground just ahead of Briggs, kicking up a spray of dust, a signal. He looked up toward the ridge. For the briefest second, a flash of reflected sunlight caught his eye, the glint of a scope, before vanishing. Whoever it was, they wanted him to come up. "Ramirez, you take the rest and hold position here," Briggs ordered. "I'm going up." The climb was brutal. The ridge was a mess of loose shale and jagged outcroppings, each step sliding back, half as far as it gained. Briggs kept low, using the natural folds of the terrain to mask his approach. Above, the wind carried the faint scent of gunpowder, recent and sharp. Halfway up, he found the first sign, a single 7.62 millimeters casing lying in the dirt, still warm to the touch. His suspicions hardened. Whoever was up here wasn't just passing through. They were hunting. By the time he reached the crest, the world behind him had gone eerily quiet. The valley below looked almost peaceful now, the insurgents' bodies sprawled where the unknown rifle had cut them down. The rest had fled, not willing to tangle with an invisible ghost. Briggs scanned the ridge. Nothing. No movement. Then, from behind a rock barely 20 feet away, a figure rose, tall, lean, draped in desert camouflage netting. The rifle slung in their hands wasn't standard issue for any U.S. unit Briggs knew of. The figure lifted a hand, palm out, a silent greeting or warning, and then pulled back the scarf covering their face. Briggs froze. It wasn't the retired sniper he had once trained with. It was someone else entirely, but with eyes just as cold and steady. The ridge was silent for a heartbeat too long. Briggs's eyes swept the high ground, his instincts gnawing at him like a restless wolf. Something was there. He could feel it. Not enemy movement, not the shifting of rocks under the desert. Wind, something sharper, controlled, almost surgical. Then it happened. A rifle crack split the air, echoing through the canyon like a whip crack from the gods. The sound rolled over the SEALs, bouncing off the rock walls. In the distance, one of the enemy machine gunners jerked violently and crumpled into the dust, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. The gunfire from the ridge wasn't frantic. It was measured. Single shots, each one finding a mark. In seconds, the balance of the fight shifted. Enemy fighters who had been pressing forward now hesitated, looking to the high ground with confusion and fear. Briggs's pulse surged. That's not one of ours. But whoever it is, they're on our side. Eyes on that ridge. Briggs shouted. If they're helping us, we keep them covered. The SEALs adjusted positions, laying down suppressive fire at enemy shooters, still trying to pin them from the west. The mysterious marksmen worked methodically, each shot timed between the SEALs' bursts, as if they trained together for years. Corporal Vegas squinted through his optics. Can't see a damn thing up there. Whoever it is, they're tucked in tight. Let's keep it that way, Briggs said. Don't need them getting lit up. The enemy, now caught between the SEALs' returning fire and the precision shots from above, began to falter. One of their RPG gunners made the mistake of stepping into the open and was instantly cut down by the ridge shooter. It wasn't just the kills. It was the timing. This ghost on the ridge seemed to know exactly when the SEALs were about to take a hit and neutralize the threat seconds beforehand. Briggs found himself wondering, who the hell are you? Then Briggs's radio hissed, Briggs, this is Overwatch. The voice was deep, steady, and carried a confidence that made it sound almost unreal. Got eyes on your grid. Keep your boys tight and push 30 meters north. I'll clear the way. Briggs didn't even question it. There was something in that voice that screamed competence. Copy, Overwatch. Moving now. The SEALs shifted in formation, weaving between cover as the mysterious sniper dismantled enemy positions ahead of them. It was like having an invisible shield. Dangerous threats evaporated before they even got within lethal range. But as they advanced, Briggs noticed something strange. The sniper wasn't firing from a single fixed point. The angle of the shots kept changing. Whoever Overwatch was, they were moving fast along the ridge, never staying in one place for more than a few rounds. That kind of mobility under fire meant one thing. This wasn't just a regular marksman. This was someone trained to be untouchable. Still, questions were for later. Right now, survival was the mission. They reached a cluster of boulders where Briggs called a short halt. The sun had almost dipped completely, and the canyon was now painted in deep purples and blacks. Night vision gear clicked into place. Overwatch, we're in position, Briggs said into his mic. The reply came instantly. Hold there. Got 3 tangos moving on your 6. Don't move until I say. The SEALs waited, listening. Moments later, crack, crack, crack. Silence. All clear. Move east. You've got 90 seconds before they regroup. Every order was precise. Every direction calculated to the second. Briggs realized that Overwatch wasn't just picking targets. He was reading the entire battlefield, predicting movements before they happened. They were almost to the edge of the kill zone when the enemy launched a last, desperate push. Gunfire erupted from multiple angles, forcing the SEALs down behind cover. Briggs risked a glance and saw over a dozen fighters charging from the north. Even Overwatch couldn't pick them all off at once. Vega, smoke out, Briggs ordered. Gray plumes hissed into the air, creating a wall of concealment. The SEALs began a fighting retreat, moving in short, sharp bursts. Overwatch's rifle cracked repeatedly, finning the attackers, but not stopping them entirely. Just as Briggs thought they might get overrun, a new sound joined the chaos. The thump, thump, thump of a heavy machine gun from the ridge. The enemy froze. Overwatch wasn't alone anymore. Through the shifting smoke, Briggs caught glimpses of movement on the ridge. 2, maybe 3 figures, working in perfect unison. It wasn't a rescue team he recognized, But they were here, and they were tearing the enemy apart. Within 2 minutes, the canyon was quiet again. Too quiet. Briggs scanned for movement, but there was nothing except the distant hiss of wind. Through stone, "Overwatch to Bravo Team," the radio crackled. "Kill zone is clear. You're safe to exfil east. Follow the markers. We'll cover you until you're out." Briggs wanted to ask 100 questions. Who are you? Where did you come from? How did you know we were here? But something told him Overwatch wouldn't answer. Some debts are paid in silence. As the SEALs began their slow, cautious exfiltration, Briggs looked back at the ridge one last time. No figures stood there now, no glint of optics. Just rock and shadow, as if the people who'd saved their lives had melted into the desert itself. Still, the echo of that first rifle shot stayed in his mind. The echo of the hidden rifle still hung in the air when Mason saw movement along the ridge. Not the slow, deliberate crawl of a sniper repositioning. This was faster, more purposeful. Whoever had fired wasn't alone. 2 tangos moving. "East," Ramirez whispered over comms, his voice tight. Mason didn't answer. His eyes followed the shapes as they disappeared into a shadowed crease of the ridge. The sniper's shot had broken the enemy's rhythm, but it had also drawn fresh attention. The insurgents were no longer just flushing them out. They were closing in. Somewhere to his right, Carter shifted position. "Sir, if they're moving that fast, they're not flanking. They're hunting." Hunting. The word tasted metallic in Mason's mouth. This wasn't just about eliminating a stranded SEAL team anymore. The enemy wanted them alive, long enough to find out who else was in play. He tapped his gun, eyes sharp. "This ridge is more than high ground. It's bait." A sudden ripple of fire tore across the far slope, cutting through the canyon's thin air. Muzzle flashes flickered like strobe lights in the growing dusk. Mason and his team ducked behind the splintered cover of rock, chips and dust stinging their faces. "Sir," Ramirez said again, "this fire pattern, it's hurting us. They're driving us somewhere." Mason's mind moved quickly. The sniper who had saved them earlier was no random player. If the enemy knew there was another shooter out here, they'd want to flush them out too. And the fastest way to do that? Force the SEALs toward them. The thought twisted in his gut. What if the sniper was an asset they couldn't lose? What if a sharp crack echoed from above, not from the ridge, but from somewhere much closer? Then a second. Bullets slammed into the rocks just feet. Away. Contact left. Carter barked. 3 enemy fighters burst from a blind ravine, firing from the hip. Their weapons chattered in bursts, spitting dirt and rock. Mason rolled to his side, sighted, and squeezed off 2 rounds. The first went wide. The second dropped the lead gunman mid-stride. But the other 2 kept moving, faster now, their eyes locked on Mason's position. The SEALs answered with disciplined fire, the sharp rhythm of their suppressed rifles a deadly counterpoint to the chaotic blasts from the insurgents. One went down in a spray of dust. The last turned to retreat, only to be dropped instantly by a shot that came from above. That ridge again, the sniper. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause, as if even the air was waiting. Mason caught himself looking up toward the source, but saw nothing, just the outline of the ridge against the burning sky. "Whoever they are," Carter muttered, "they've got our backs." "Maybe," Mason said quietly, "or maybe we're just in their way." Before anyone could answer, a deafening boom rolled through the canyon, deeper and more resonant than any rifle shot. A cloud of dust and rock exploded from a cliff face to the west. "Demo charges," Ramirez said. "They're collapsing the pass." The realization hit Mason hard. They weren't just being hunted. They were being boxed in. "Move!" "East." "Ridge now," Mason marked. The team sprang into motion, weaving through the jagged terrain, every step kicking loose gravel that skittered down the slope. Behind them, the air was thick with drifting dust and the echo of falling rock. Every few seconds, another round from the hidden sniper cracked out, precise and unerring. It was hard to tell if the shots were clearing a path for the SEALs or simply thinning out whoever was closing in. As they neared the base of the East Ridge, Mason spotted a narrow cut in the rock, almost invisible unless you were looking straight at it. A perfect choke point, perfect for an ambush, too. He hesitated for half a second, then waved his team forward. Stay tight. We're not stopping until we're through. Inside the cut, the air cooled, and the sound of the battlefield dulled to a distant roar. The path twisted sharply, forcing them into single file. Every instinct in Mason screamed at him to keep moving, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Halfway through, Ramirez stopped short. "Tripwire," he said, pointing to a faint glint across the path. Mason's pulse slammed in his ears. They were in a kill channel. Disarm or bypass? Carter asked. Before Mason could answer, another shot rang out, but this one didn't come from the sniper's ridge. It came from directly ahead, deeper in the pass. The bullet smacked into the rock inches from Ramirez's head. Contact front. The team dove for what little cover there was, returning fire down the narrow corridor. Whoever was ahead of them had the advantage. They were dug in, and the SEALs had nowhere to maneuver. Then, above the crack of rifles, another sound cut in. A voice. Faint at first, then clearer. "Briggs, keep low and move right." Mason froze. That voice. He hadn't heard it in nearly 3 years. "Sir?" Carter's voice was questioning. But Mason didn't answer. Because if he was hearing what he thought he was hearing, then the sniper wasn't just some ghost on a ridge. They were someone Mason had once trusted with his life. And they were right here, in the middle of the trap. The voice was unmistakable. "Briggs, keep low and move right." Mason's heart hammered. The words came from just beyond the narrow choke point, clear and urgent. He swallowed hard, forcing calm over the chaos. "Lieutenant Reyes?" "Briggs," whispered, disbelief bleeding into his tone. A figure emerged from behind a jagged boulder tall, lean, wrapped in desert camo like a shadow melting into the rocks. The scarf fell away to reveal sharp eyes and a face etched with grit and determination. "Yes," Reyes said, voice low but fierce. "I'm the one who's been covering you from the ridge." Briggs blinked, memories flooding back. Reyes had been presumed KIA 2 years ago during a covert op overseas. Her disappearance had haunted the team and Mason personally. Now here she was, alive and saving their lives. How? Why? Briggs demanded, eyes scanning the pass for danger. Reyes gestured to the narrow corridor. Because this wasn't a training exercise gone wrong. It was a trap. Someone wanted you dead. The pieces clicked into place. The hidden shooters, the lack of command support, the deadly precision of the ambush. This was no accident. "We found out there was a leak," Reyes continued, her voice hard. "Someone inside wanted to stop your team from exposing illegal arms shipments hidden in the desert." Briggs clenched his fists. "So they hired mercs, or rogue operatives, to take us out during what was supposed to be a routine training." Reyes nodded. "And I was sent in quietly to protect you. But when the ambush started, I couldn't reveal myself until I was sure who was friend and who was foe." A new burst of gunfire echoed ahead, reminding them the danger wasn't over. "Can you get us out?" Briggs asked, urgency creeping into his voice. Reyes lifted her rifle, eyes narrowing. "Follow me, but stay low. The path ahead is rigged." She led them through the twisting canyon, moving with a practiced stealth that betrayed years of survival. Every step was calculated, every glance measured. Suddenly, Reyes stopped, pointing to faint wires strung across the path tripwires rigged to explosives. Carter carefully disarmed them, under Reyes's watchful eye, muscles tense with every careful movement. As they pressed onward, the tension thickened. Briggs realized this mission was no longer just about survival. It was about exposing the betrayal from within and bringing justice to those who tried to silence them. Reyes paused at a vantage point overlooking the exit from the eye. "Canyon, we're close. But there's one last obstacle." Down below, 2 armed guards patrolled the final checkpoint, a fortified outpost blocking their way to freedom. Briggs looked at his team. They were exhausted but alive. "We take them out quietly. No alarms." Reyes smiled grimly. "Just like old times." In synchronized silence, the SEALs moved into position. One by one, the guards dropped, silent as shadows swallowed by night. The team slipped past the checkpoint, adrenaline flooding their veins. Outside, a convoy waited extraction, and evidence ready to expose the conspiracy. As Briggs climbed into the vehicle, he looked back at the ridge where Reyes had fought silently, unseen. "Thanks," he said, voice low. She nodded. "We're not done yet." And in the distance, the echo of that first rifle shot lingered, proof that sometimes survival depended on a single bullet fired from a hidden ridge.